Hope you're doing well. Glad you're here with us today. So we're going to continue our study in Genesis. So we're going to be in chapter 6. We're going to kind of sporadic through chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9. So if you want to follow along, you can follow along on the screens. But just to catch you up, and if you've been with us, you know what we've been doing, or you're watching along with us and you're not able to be here with us, we've been looking at the characters from the book of Genesis. And a lot of these stories are very familiar. But what I've enjoyed is how a common, familiar story can still have so much truth today. Because often with a familiar story, what happens is we forget to take the time to look for the application. Because we know it. We've heard it. And what I have loved as I've been looking at these stories and studying these stories is God been making them fresh and new to me. And I hope the same is true for you. So the first week we looked at, the first character was God, right? As we said, we can only go downhill from there. So we had God and creation. Second week, last week, we had Adam and Eve and looked at the introduction of sin. Today, we're going to be looking at the story of Noah. And so the focus today is really simple. We're going to look at what this story teaches us, what lessons we can learn from Noah's life. Again, another familiar story. But my prayer is that God will take a very familiar story and give you a fresh, new message for you right where you are today. So let's jump right in. So we have 3 lessons we're going to focus on today. There is so much more I could have done, but I just narrowed it down to 3 key things that honestly I think I needed to hear today. So I hope you do too. So let's look at the first one. So the first lesson we see is the value of faith. And let's look at this story. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit through this, but if you know this story, you know that Noah is asked to do something pretty big, right? And so I'm just going to highlight some verses that really show you what he is asked to do. So let's look here. Chapter 6, verse 7 through 10. It says, "And the Lord said, I will wipe out this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals, the scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them." But Noah found favor with the Lord. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time. And he walked in close fellowship with God. And then we're going to bounce around. And go ahead and skip to verse 17. So this is God talking. He said, "Look, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die. But I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, and you and your wife and your sons and their wives." So he's telling Noah, listen, everything's going to be destroyed, but I'm going to rescue you. You're going to build this ark. He gives all the details. And every time, what stood out to me, we'll look at chapter 7, verse 23 as well. Then so it's done. God wiped out every living thing on earth, people, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky. All were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with him on the boat. And I read all those verses. Again, you know the story. But I read them because what stood out to me is there's 2 groups of people. Everyone's getting destroyed except for Noah. I'm angry with earth except for you, Noah. It's done. Everything's destroyed. But the only thing that survived was Noah. And as I read this, the first question that came to my mind is, why? Now, obviously it tells us, but why? What separated Noah from everyone else? Was he perfect? Well, the answer is no, because if you read all of the story, you know, and we're going to talk about it, he is far from perfect. He makes a pretty big mistake here in a little bit. No, it wasn't perfect. What was it that separated Noah from the rest of the world? And I think Hebrews says it pretty clearly, 11:7, talking about the heroes of the faith, and it mentions Noah, and it says, it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about the things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. What separated Noah? What rescued him? It was his complete and utter surrender and faith in the Lord. See, what rescued Noah from destruction was the same thing that rescues us from destruction, putting our full hope and trust in the Lord. And no, Jesus wasn't there yet. We didn't have Jesus at this point to rescue from the sins, but it was still the thing that connected you to God or separated you from God was fully surrendering to the Lord. And see, that Hebrew verse says we saw his faith by the things he did, but God could see his faith before he ever asked him what to do. God could see who he was and what he was committed to. And it was his faith that separated those who died and those who lived. And this morning, as I was thinking about this, I thought, look at the impact Noah's faith had. It didn't just rescue himself, it rescued his family. And I was reminded that as a father, the greatest gift I can give my family is to be fully surrendered to the Lord. Literally, life and death hung in the balance, and it was all dependent upon his faith in the Lord. If Noah was just like the rest of the world, his family would have been destroyed. But because when God looked, his surrender, his commitment to God separated him from everyone else. Not that he was perfect, but that he was walking with the Lord, it says. And I thought, what if we began to see life like that? What if we began to realize that there is so much at stake? And literally, life and death is hanging in the balance based on what we believe and how we live. Because Noah's faith saved his family. But I think if we really could look at the impact our faith has on the world around us, we might could see the same consequences. We might could see the people that are watching the things we say and do. Because here's the deal. Noah having faith and loving the Lord and being fully surrendered to the Lord was not about going to church on Sunday. Was not about standing up and talking about God all the time. Was not about being able to quote a bunch of verses. It was that he was fully surrendered to the Lord. And I just wonder if right now God said, it's over, I'm wiping it out, and I'll save those who are truly surrendered to me. Would you be here or would you not? And this isn't to beat you up. This isn't to make you feel guilty. This was a challenge to me that I want to be so surrendered to the Lord that he says, I'm going to keep you so you can continue to point people to Jesus. Your faith has an impact on so many around you. And I just was reminded this morning as I was praying and I was preparing that so often I value so many different things in my life. I think that as a father, I got to be able to provide experiences, or I got to be able to provide money, or I got to be able to do all this stuff. And this morning, as I looked at these verses, I was reminded that if I am fully surrendered to the Lord, I will be the best father I possibly could be. Because my kids don't need to see a really good speaker. My kids don't need to see a really strong person, a really creative person, a hard worker. They need to see what it looks like to love the Lord. And that's the greatest gift Noah gave his family. Yeah, he obeyed, and yes, he built the ark. But if he didn't trust the Lord to start with, they never get that journey. And so as I looked at this story today, I was reminded of the value that faith has. And so I just wonder today, does your faith and surrender in the Lord separate you from the world around you? Or if God were to look, do you just blend right in? Let's continue. So that's the first lesson that stood out to me. And like I said, there's many lessons we could talk about, but that's the first one. The second one, here's the second one that stood out. That God's promises, well, they take patience. So when you look at this story, the first part of the story doesn't give us, if you just look at just the words given, it doesn't give us a lot of description on how long it takes. But there are some numbers it does give us. And when it talks about the length of time, it's when they get on the boat. So I want to focus there first, and then we'll go backwards. So when they get on the ark, and I was imagining this morning that what if this was me? What if this is me that God had said, Brad, I want you to build a boat. I mean, I would be lost. I would have to I'd call Mr. Russell's what I would do. I'd say, Mr. Russell, we got to build a boat. But I just thought, what if he said, let's build a boat, and you go take some animals. I wouldn't love the idea because I'm not a big animal person. I got to be honest. I actually don't like animals. I have a dog, but I was thinking about this morning. I'm not a dog person. I'm a porter person. That's the name of our dog. But I'm not a dog person. I kind of see it the same way with kids. Like I'm an Ava Kate and Nora Gray person, but I'm not real big on kids. I love your kids. Like if you have kids, they're wonderful. But I'm not the biggest fan. So imagining, I love yours, Chet, but imagining going on a boat with a whole bunch of animals wouldn't excite me. But I can't imagine, because the way I think in immediate terms. I think that everything's going to happen like this, right? So I know that my expectation would be that, okay, well, it's going to rain, so we better hurry. We'll get this boat. Next week, we'll drop these animals off, and we'll go back to normal life. But that's not exactly how it happened, is it? Let's read a little bit of verses. So it said, and the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days. I just roll my eyes reading that. That's a long time to be with a bunch of animals in a boat. And then let's keep going. I have some other verses here. So the flood waters gradually receded from the earth after 150 days. So another 150 days. So it rains for 150. Then they recede for 150. Exactly 5 months from the time the flood began, the boat became to a rest on the mountains of Ararat. Again, I can imagine thinking, is this ever going to end? Like, I love my family, but being trapped in a boat and then add thousands of animals to it, I don't even want to imagine our attitudes. I don't want to imagine how pleasant we would be at this point. And then 2.5 months later, as the water continued to go down, other mountain peaks became visible. And again, we don't get a glimpse of his attitude, but if he was human, I can imagine it wasn't always pleasant. And so we see it takes a long time. And was that the last of those verses? Okay. And then Noah now was 601 years old. When they got on the boat, you know how old he was? 600. Almost a year they're on this boat. A year. Okay, do you imagine going on vacation You packed your car, you get in the car, you decide you're going to take the family dog because we're not going that far. And then God says, no, I want you to drive in this car for a year. You don't get to leave this car for a whole year. I would lose my mind. I can guarantee you they weren't expecting a year. There was never a whisper that, hey, you're going to be there a year. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, man, that's a long time to have to wait for all this. And then I went backwards and I thought, wait, I don't remember. How long did it actually take to build the thing? Do you know how long it took to build the ark? Now, I want to be clear. It is not 100% clear the exact amount of time it took. There are estimates because the scripture doesn't give us the exact amount of time. But when you look at the ages, when you look at the ages of the kids, when you look at the details it does give, historians estimate that it's anywhere from 45 years to 75 years. Some even say 100 years. Okay, now this just got even harder. Not only did they have to ride in a boat for a year, it took at least 50 years to build the thing. And let's understand, this wasn't Brevard that he told him to build a boat in. If God told you to build a boat in Brevard, you say, about time, I thought it was going to flood a long time ago. Like it wouldn't surprise you if someone said we were going to be flooded. It never had rained. So not only does it have to take a long time, it has to take a long time while everyone's making fun of him. Well, everyone's thinking he's the crazy old man because he is 600 years old. My mind, as I started thinking about these details, I couldn't get my mind around it. But as I thought about how long it took, because again, if God says to you, hey, I need you to build this because it's going to flood, you're thinking, oh, we better hurry. But he said, no, it's going to flood 100 years from now. And then it's going to take a year to survive the flood. That's a long time. And as I thought about that, what stood out to me so clearly was that when God promises something, we can 100% guarantee it. But we sure can't know when it's going to be. And to lean on the promises of God, well, it takes a little bit of patience. And I can only imagine there had to be a moment in time where he went, any day now, Lord. What about now? It's encouraging to read scriptures like God won't harm us and he'll only take care of us and he does things with what's best for us and read all these it's nice to read those. It's just when things get difficult, it's sometimes hard to trust them. It's sometimes hard to lean on them. It's sometimes hard to be reminded of them. And today, as I read this story, I was reminded that, Lord, you don't waver. And you aren't lacking. And if you say it, it will always happen. But that does not mean it will happen within my expectations or in my time. And I had this, and maybe this was just for me because I did need this week, and I'll show you why. But I couldn't help this morning to think that somebody that's listening, that somebody that's sitting here today needs to be reminded that God hasn't given up on you. And God hasn't lost any ability or strength. And the God that got you here hasn't left you. And that if he promised it, it will come true. But it's going to take a little bit of patience. And this week I was reminded of that. So I haven't talked much about the shelter recently. We took a little break. It was kind of a breather, right? But we've been trying to kind of work our way back to, because, November will be here before you know it, and it'll be time for the shelter again. But a lot of what we've been waiting for, and I'll be honest, I don't know why I do this to myself, but I do it. I know life isn't simple, and there's no magic bullet or simple solution to anything. But when offered one, sometimes I like to think, well, maybe this time it will be really easy. I don't know why. You think I'd stop buying into that lie. But I had got it in my head that, and I think I mentioned a long time ago, there was an opportunity for a grant type thing to give us a large amount of money. But it didn't work out this one time. But all we were told is if you get it in next time, you're going to get this money. And it'll be a lot of money. And so my mind had really gotten comfortable with thinking, we'll just bide our time until June comes, because that's when they'll tell us that we got the money, and then we can do all the things we need to still do. And I really, again, I look back and go, why would you be so foolish? But I really had gotten all my hopes on the idea that, okay, God, this is the answer. We'll be able to get the building we need. We'll be able to hire people to stay overnight. We'll be able to do all these things. And then this week, a fairly stressful week. It's one of the last weeks of school. Usually my 7th week of school is always the worst. And I'm finishing an incredibly hard project. And my dad gives me a call. And I didn't really want to answer it because I'm focused. But I'm like, no, I need to answer. Dad's calling. So I say, hey, what's up? And he's talking and being real positive. He goes, oh, by the way, we didn't get the money. And I said, what? And I'm a little mad. I'm going to be honest with you. My attitude wasn't great. And I'm going, why would you even bury the lead? Like, why didn't you start with that? He's like, well, because I'm not worried about it. I think God's going to take care of us. And I even said, please don't over-spiritualize this. I'm just being honest. I don't like to admit when I'm not who I should be. But I also want you to see that we're all not who we should be sometimes. And then I got off the phone, and obviously I didn't like my response. And I sat at my desk, and I was mad. And I even cried a little bit. Because I said, God, why? I got to believe I didn't mishear you say that this is what we're supposed to do. Scripture says we're supposed to take care of these type of people. Why would we put ourselves out there and it'd be so stinking hard to do it? And all I could hear him say was, listen, if I was good enough to get you here, am I not good enough to get you through it? And then I read these verses and I thought, okay, God, I truly believe you have called us to take care of those less fortunate. You have called us to be a light in a really dark world. And I also believe that you're going to provide exactly when we need it, exactly when it's time. Not in my timing, in your timing. And so like I said, these points today may have just been for me. I may have been the only one needed to hear it, but I needed to be reminded that God's promise is a promise, and it can be taken to the bank, but it'll take some patience, and it'll take faith. But when it comes through, it'll be exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. And I think Noah saw it, and I think if we look in our own lives, very few things in our lives that were truly exactly what we needed came in a moment. Because if we're honest, we're not usually ready. It's the journey that prepares us. Let's continue. So, two lessons we see so far. The value of faith, and that God's promise takes patience. And the third is success makes us vulnerable. So remember I said that God didn't choose Noah because he was perfect. Well, here's where we get to see him not be so perfect. So chapter 9, verse 20. The flood is over. Obviously, they're relieved to get off this boat. They gotta be. And let's see what happens when they get off. After the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine he made, and he became drunk and lay naked inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his brothers. Then Shem and Japheth took the robe, held it over their shoulders, and backed into the tent to cover their father. And they did this. They looked the other way so they would not see him naked. Now, I know it's a weird verses, and you're going, why are we talking about Noah being naked? But I don't want to so much focus on what he did, but that he did it. Because here's what's happening. I can't think of many better victories than the fact that you are the sole survivor of all creation living, all because you had faith in the Lord. That's a pretty big reward, right? That's pretty successful. And as soon as he gets off the boat, he gets drunk. And when he gets drunk, he gets naked. And as I read this, and I'll tell you, this is something that every time I read this, I'm reminded of. And I'm reminded of this because I've experienced it. That when we experience the most success in our life is when we are the most vulnerable to fail in our life. Because no matter how good you are, no matter how well you're doing, no matter how spiritually strong you feel, your next failure is just right around the corner. It's just the way it is. Not you have to fail, but you're more vulnerable to fail. Why? Well, let's look at it. When life's hard, what do? When you're suffering, when you're lacking, when you're sick, when finances are tight, when there's crisis of any kind, it is natural to do what? Cling as tight to the Lord as we possibly can. Why? Because we can't breathe. We can't take the next step. We can't even get our head off the pillow without the strength of the Lord. You ever been there? Those are some of the most spiritually full and rich moments I've ever had in my life when I'm my most desperate. But then the sun comes out. Get a little bit of success, and maybe not much, just a little bit. And what do? We loosen our grip, we drop our hands, and all of a sudden we become vulnerable. I experience this every single Sunday. I'll tell you, I was thinking about this morning. When I think of my life, when I struggle with the most temptation, when I feel the weakest, is almost always Sunday evenings. Sunday evenings are when my mind starts to want to run. Sunday evenings are when I feel like temptation just comes at me in waves. And I think it's because all week long I'm focused, I'm reading the word, I'm ready, I'm practicing in my head, I'm thinking about these things. When I'm driving, I'm even going over these points. And then I breathe, and I put my hands down, and I drop my guard, and all of a sudden, Satan sees a vulnerable little lamb, and he says, let's get him. See, Proverbs says this, that we have to guard our heart above everything else, for it determines the course of your life. When you succeed, I am not saying that you have to suffer all through life. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that in your suffering and in your success, you have to be willing to guard your heart. Continue to be aware of the dangers around us, because the minute, and I don't know the time frame of how long it took for Noah to get naked and drunk, but I know he did it. And I think about this story, and it's not the only time we see success and failure one and the same. And quickly, as we wrap up, there's one other story in Scripture that I couldn't help but be drawn to as I was thinking about this morning, and it's a familiar story. Another man who did an incredible thing for the Lord, Elijah. I can't think of a more rewarding, victory than Elijah had when he's standing there with all these crazy people cutting themselves and begging their gods to start a fire with wood that was dry. And then Elijah walks up, wets the wood, and says, hey, God, show up. And he shows up. You talking about victory. You're talking about being pumped up. Like, not often do we get to see the Lord work that quickly, that tangibly. And you know what happens right after? Literally, almost moments after that incredible victory. Let me read it. Right after this, obviously he makes some people mad. The people being mad scare him, and this is his response. Then he went on alone until the wilderness. Traveling all day, he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. You see what just happened? Victory like maybe we'll never see. And in the next breath, he wanted to die. If we're not careful, even a glimpse of success can lead to some of the most tragic failures we've ever had. But what I love is the Lord's response to his prayer. Verse 5. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on the hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and then he laid down again. And this morning, as I was reminded of that story, I thought, you know what? So often, we think our response to every difficulty in life is to work harder and to push more and to do more and to fight harder. And sometimes all we need to do is to lay down, curl up by the Lord and say, give me rest. Give me peace. Breathe back into me. God didn't give him a verse. God didn't give him a task. He gave him food and he gave him sleep. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, man, Lord, right now, I feel a little bit like Elijah. I feel like I've experienced a lot of victory. We did a lot of great things. We came out of the shelter, and honestly, I should have been more pumped up than I've ever been. And right now, over the last 2 months, I've been more exhausted and beat up and defeated than I've ever been. And you know what my response to that's been? Read more scripture, do more things, take on more tasks. And this morning I heard God say, do less. Rely on me. Let me be your strength. Because see, this is what victory does. It gives us just a tad bit of confidence. You know what confidence does? Makes us think that we had something to do with the victory. And that's exactly where Satan wants you. Because once you start relying on your power and not God's, you are fresh meat. And this morning I was just reminded, Lord, I just need some time with you. I just need some time to slow down. And the Lord knew that. As I was struggling, and you know, when you struggle, when you're suffering, we like to think that as long as we smile and we keep our heads up and we don't complain, nobody will know. But thankfully, God puts the right people at the right time. And my dad called me yesterday, and we talked on the phone, and he said, hey, so me and Marcus, you know Marcus, an elder here, he said, we were talking, and we think it would be best for you for the next 8 weeks to just take a break from school. So if you know what I've been doing, if you know, I've been doing pastoring, we're doing all this and going to school to get my master's in counseling. And I love it, and I'm so grateful for it. And all the classes are every 8 weeks. They're back to back to back. And I first started thinking, man, this is easy. Like, I should have done this a long time ago. But now I'm to the point in this program where now I'm earning my keep. And it's hard. And listen, I didn't want to even have this conversation this morning because I don't want it to sound like I'm complaining. Because I'm not. I have an incredible job and I have an incredible opportunity to do what I'm doing, and many people work way harder than me. But what I was reminded, And when he first said, you should take a break for just 8 weeks and then start back, my first answer was, I don't think that's a good idea. But also what God reminded me is why? Because you're supposed to, or because you're afraid of how it'll make you look? And I'm telling you this story because so often we put all of the success and failures in our life on our shoulders. And we depend on us. But at some point, we'll end up like Elijah, broken down, going, Lord, just take me. And no success he could give you will be enough. And the only solution to your brokenness will be rest in the Lord. Will be him breathing life back into you. And so yesterday, after I spent a little time praying, I said, okay, God, I'm going to take the next 8 weeks. And I want to be the best dad I can be for the next 8 weeks. My kids aren't home much. The summer is all we get. And I just say, Lord, I'm going to be the best dad, but more than that, I want this next 8 weeks to be a time of revival with me and you, Lord. I want this to be a time where I take a verse and I just open it and say, God, you speak. Because unintentionally, I have filled my schedule so full that the Lord, well, he gets whatever's left. And what I've realized is what I feel in my heart and how I feel physically is the result of God getting what's left. And so when I think about Noah, I think about Elijah, incredible success and incredible failure. You can look at churches and ministries all over the world, and you're going, man, they are doing incredible things. And the next day, they resign from their church because they had an affair, because they were embezzling money. How do you think that happens? Because we lose our grip on God, and we start to depend on ourselves. We should never forget that no matter where we are with God, if we're not careful, our next failure is right around the corner. He's not asking you to do more. He's not asking you to work harder. He's actually asking you to do a little bit less and fully surrender to him. Let's pray. Lord, you know that this is not the kind of message I actually enjoy giving. I would rather give a message that I can stand from up on top and speak down to something I already feel like I've accomplished or I already feel like I've done and give advice to those who need it. But Lord, truthfully today, I'm speaking in the middle of all these experiences. I didn't expect, Lord, for Noah's story to hit me as hard as it did this week. But God, I feel like I am right where Noah was. I'm being asked to trust you. I'm being asked to wait on you. And I'm being asked to depend on you. And maybe I'm the only one, but I can't help but believe that at some piece of that is where each of us are. So Lord, I pray that you'll use this story to teach us, to strengthen us, to encourage us, to give us hope, to let us know that we don't give up, that just because it's taken 20 years, just because it's taken 6 months, that doesn't mean you've given up on us. Lord, I don't know what each person needs. I don't know what each person listening needs, but Lord, you do. Use Noah's story to encourage and to strengthen them right where they are. Lord, I thank you. I thank you how you use this story in my life. I love you. In your name, amen. Thank you for being here. Fathers, we love you. Happy Father's Day. I truly appreciate the men in this church. I am so grateful for the men. How so many of the men in this church have been fathers or played some influential role in my life. So I am so grateful for that. And I do encourage you that whether your dad is still alive or no matter how your dad was, that you will reach out to your father or someone who's played that role in your life and just say thank you. They need to hear it. So I love you, and we'll see you next week.